Okay, we are going to finish up osteology of the upper extremity. In a previous video, we covered the clavicle and the scapula. We did a separate video for the humerus, which is known as the arm, and then another video on the forearm for the radius and ulnar. And now we're going to be looking at the hand. But when we look at the hand, we can see the distal end of the radius, and we can see the distal end of the ulnar. And we can see that those two bones articulate with the bones of the wrist that are called the carpal bones. And the carpal bones, there are 8 of them. There are 8 carpal bones, and they are split or divided into a proximal row, which are these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a distal row, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the way we study them, it's proximal row first, and then distal row last. And we're going to study them from lateral to medial, going from the thumb side to the pinky side. So a little silly mnemonic to remember them. It is silly. It is some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Okay, so if you take the first letter of each of those words, then the sum is scaphoid, lovers is lunate, some lovers, triquetrum, triquetrum, positions, P, pisiform. Some lovers try position. So those are the 4 in the proximal row from lateral to medial. Okay. This one right here, the pisiform, you can feel it on yourself if you take your thumb and you put it right here on your pinky side. You can feel the pisiform. If you're using the mouse of a computer, it's the pisiform that's resting on the desk that's getting compressed. That's called the pisiform. The pisiform sits right on top of the triquetrum, or sits anterior to the triquetrum. Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. The scaphoid you can also feel if you put your finger in this depression. If you were to raise your thumb and do like a thumbs up, there is a depression right here at the proximal base of that first metacarpal. They call it anatomical snuff box. And if you put your finger in that depression and then you move your wrist down, straight down, there's a bone that pops up right up against your finger. That's called the scaphoid right here. The lunate, this is the bone that dislocates the most, or subluxates or dislocates the most, the lunate. And when it does, it can put pressure on the median nerve. And when the median nerve gets compressed, they call it carpal tunnel syndrome. You've heard of carpal tunnel syndrome before. So these carpal bones make up the floor of the carpal tunnel. And then the roof is a bunch of ligaments that go from the lateral side to the medial side, like a band of a watch goes transversely from these 2 bones to these 2 bones running across. And then through that tunnel is the median nerve and a bunch of other tendons. Okay, so we did some lovers try positions. Now let's look at the distal row that they can't handle. So that is trapezium, they, trapezoid, can't, capitate. That's the largest carpal bone. It means capital, like the head. It's the large one. It's in alignment with that third metacarpal. And then handle is for the hamate. And this is a hook. They call it the hook of the hamate. The hook of the hamate, but that's the hamate bone. The Then, so those are the 8 carpal bones. And again, you would study them by knowing the 4 in the proximal row and then the 4 in the distal row. You start them from lateral to medial. And then again, distal row, lateral to medial. After the carpals, the key word is after, right? So after the carpals is metacarpals, and that's what meta means. Meta means after, like a metamorphosis, the change that took place after. There are 5 digits, and we name them by their number. Here's metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, metacarpal 3, metacarpal 4, metacarpal 5. Then we have phalanges, right? So these are the metacarpals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have phalange or phalanx. Now, if we look at digits 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's 3 segments to digits 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. We call them proximal, middle, and distal phalanx. There's a proximal phalanx, a middle phalanx, and a distal. There's a proximal, middle, distal, proximal, middle, distal, and a proximal, middle, distal. If you're ever asked this on an exam or on a test, and let's say I asked for this one right here, you would say third middle phalanx. If it pointed to this one, you would say the second distal phalanx. If it pointed here, you would say the 5th proximal phalanx. So you have to be specific. You can't just say proximal phalanx or middle phalanx. You have to know which one. Because if you're getting into nursing and someone breaks this bone, you can't say, oh, patient has tenderness and excruciating pain on the middle phalanx. They're going to go, which one? You're going to say the second middle phalanx is tender. Okay, so digits 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have a proximal, middle, and a distal phalanx. However, the thumb does not. The thumb only has a proximal and a distal phalanx. There's only a proximal phalanx and a distal. The thumb does not have the middle phalanx. And a lot of students confuse this. They always make this mistake, and I don't want anyone to make the mistake. They think like this is the proximal phalange, middle phalange, and then a distal phalange. But you have to remember the thumb doesn't have a middle phalange. It has a first metacarpal, a proximal phalange, and a distal phalange. Okay, so let's review that quickly. We have a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth metacarpal. Then we have a second, third, fourth, and fifth proximal phalange. This is called the first proximal phalange. Then we have a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth distal phalanx or phalange. But there's only a second, third, fourth, and fifth middle phalanx or phalange.